The airport was a world of its own, a busy hive of noise and motion. People rushed in every direction, their rolling suitcases making a constant clatter on the shiny floors. There was the distant voice of the announcer calling out flight numbers, the beeping of carts and the general hum of 1,000 conversations all happening at once. In the middle of all this chaos, one man stood with a sense of calm purpose. He was a businessman, and you could tell he was important just by looking at him. He stood tall and straight, and his suit was a deep dark gray, perfectly pressed without a single wrinkle. It wasn't a flashy suit, but it was made of fine material that spoke of quiet money and good taste. His shoes were polished to a high shine, reflecting the bright airport lights above. In his hand he held a simple leather briefcase worn soft in places from years of use. He looked like a man who was used to being in charge, a man who made big decisions for a living. He walked towards the gate for his flight, a long-haul journey across the country. He had a first-class ticket, which he had booked and paid for well in advance. For a man like him, who spent more time in the air than in his own living room, the small comforts of first class were not a luxury. They were a necessity. The extra space meant he could open his laptop and work undisturbed. The quiet atmosphere allowed him to think, to prepare for the important meetings that waited for him at the other end of this flight. He joined the line for first-class boarding, a shorter, quieter line than the long, snaking one for economy. He felt the familiar weight of his passport and boarding pass in his hand. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the podium and offered a small, polite smile to the woman working there. Her name tag said, Carol. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and calm. Carol gave him a quick professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took his boarding pass and scanned it. The moment the barcode was read, her smile tightened. A slight frown appeared on her face as she stared at her computer screen. She tapped a few keys, her fingers hitting them a little too hard. She looked up at him and her polite mask was gone, replaced by a look of cool inconvenience. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone flat. "There's been an operational issue with your seat." The businessman's smile faded, but his expression remained neutral. He was a professional and he was used to solving problems. "An operational issue? Could you please explain what that means?" "It means your seat is no longer available," Carol said, avoiding his gaze and looking back at her screen. "We've had to reassign you." She picked up a new boarding pass from her printer and held it out to him. It was a flimsy, standard paper ticket. "You'll be in 27B, that's in the main cabin." The main cabin. A middle seat crammed between two other passengers with no room to work and no peace to think. He didn't take the new ticket right away. He stood his ground, his posture straight. "I don't understand," he said, keeping his voice low and reasonable so as not to cause a scene. "I have a confirmed ticket for first class. I booked it weeks ago. What kind of operational issue causes that?" Carol let out a small, impatient sigh, as if he were a child asking too many questions. "These things happen, sir. The system does updates. Sometimes seats get double booked." Her explanation was vague and dismissive. "The new boarding pass is right here. You need to take it so we can continue boarding." Behind him, other first-class passengers were beginning to line up. He could feel their impatient stares. The pressure was on him to just accept this and move along. But everything felt wrong. He had flown millions of miles with this airline and had never encountered a problem like this. Just then, another passenger, a man, walked up to the side of the podium. This man looked a little flustered and was holding his phone out. "Excuse me," he said to Carol. "The app says I'm in 2A. Carol's entire demeanor changed. Her face lit up with a warm, welcoming smile. "Oh yes, of course. Mr. Henderson, we have you all sorted. Welcome aboard." She took his phone, scanned the code with a cheerful beep, and handed him a stiff premium first-class boarding pass. "You can head right on down the jet bridge." The businessman watched this whole exchange, a cold understanding settling in his stomach. The man, Mr. Henderson, was white. He, the businessman, was black. The operational issue wasn't in the computer system. It was standing right here at the gate. He turned back to Carol, his eyes now sharp and focused. "So you found a first-class seat for him just now, but not for me, even though I was here first with a confirmed ticket?" Carol's face hardened. The friendly mask was completely gone now, replaced by open irritation. She looked him up and down, her eyes lingering on his face for a moment too long. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping and taking on a condescending edge. The decision has been made. You should be grateful that you have a seat on this flight at all. Now, are you going to take this boarding pass, or do I need to call security? The words hung in the air between them, heavy and ugly. You should be grateful. It wasn't just a refusal. It was an insult. It was a power play, designed to make him feel small, to put him in his place. It was a reminder that in her eyes, no matter how expensive his suit was or how important his job might be, he was less than. For a long second, he just looked at her. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. The people behind him were probably staring, but he didn't care. He saw the smug certainty in Carol's eyes. She was sure she had won. She was sure he would have to shuffle back to the economy section and accept this humiliation. He finally reached out and took the flimsy economy boarding pass from her hand. He didn't look at it. He simply folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you for your help," he said, his voice dangerously quiet and calm. Then he turned, picked up his briefcase, and without another word, he walked towards the jet bridge, following the other passengers onto the plane. But as he walked, the calm on his face was not the calm of defeat. It was the focused, intense calm of a man who had just decided to go to war. And he already knew he was going to win. He just needed to get to his seat first, even if it was a cramped middle seat in row 27. The narrow aisle of the airplane felt like a tunnel, leading him away from the world he knew, and into a different, more cramped reality. Other passengers bustled around him, stuffing bags into overhead bins and shuffling into their seats. He moved past the comfortable, spacious pods of first class without a glance. The plush seats and wide armrests seemed to mock him as he walked by. He finally found row 27. It was deep in the plane, near the back, where the constant hum of the engines was a little louder. He looked at the 3 seats. 27A was already occupied by a man who had taken the window seat and was already leaning against the wall, closing his eyes. 27C, the aisle seat, was taken by a woman organizing a bag of snacks and a neck pillow, and there between them was 27B, a middle seat. It looked even smaller than he had imagined. "Excuse me," he said, his voice still calm and polite. The woman in the aisle seat looked up and smiled, moving her knees to the side to let him pass. He squeezed through, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you," and settled into the middle seat. His shoulders touched the shoulders of the people on either side of him. There was no room to move. He placed his fine leather briefcase carefully under the seat in front of him, a tight fit. He felt the press of the seat back against his knees. This was his reality for the next several hours. The air felt stuffy and thick with the smell of recycled air and disinfectant. As the rest of the plane finished boarding, he saw the first-class passengers being offered glasses of champagne or orange juice by smiling flight attendants. He was offered a thin, complimentary magazine. He took it with a nod and placed it unread into the seat pocket in front of him. The humiliation from the gate was a hot, sharp stone in his chest. The gate agent's words echoed in his mind, "You should be grateful." He replayed the scene, the way her face had changed when the other passenger approached, the way her voice had dripped with condescension. He knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was not a mistake. This was discrimination, plain and simple. But getting angry, making a scene right now would achieve nothing. It might even get him kicked off the flight. The gate agent would probably love that. No, he had to be smarter than that. He was a strategist. His entire job was about finding pressure points, understanding complex systems, and creating solutions that were both elegant and devastatingly effective. He took a slow, deep breath, pushing the hot anger down and locking it away. He needed to turn this raw emotion into cold, hard action. The plane doors closed with a heavy thud, and the aircraft began to push back from the gate. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. He ignored it. Instead, he reached down and unzipped his briefcase. He pulled out his laptop, balancing it carefully on the small folded-down tray table. It was a tight squeeze, and the person next to him shifted, making the whole table wobble. The laptop screen glowed to life, illuminating his calm, determined face in the dim cabin light. While other passengers scrolled through movies or played games on their phones, he opened his internet browser. He connected to the plane's expensive, slow Wi-Fi without a second thought about the cost. Money was not the object here. Justice was. He started to type, his fingers moving with purpose. He wasn't searching for how to complain about an airline. That was too simple. He was looking for something with more power, more teeth. He knew the airline industry was a world of rules. It was governed by massive, detailed books of regulations that were as strong as law. His own consulting firm specialized in this very area: logistics, supply chains, and the complex rules that big transportation companies had to follow. He had advised airports and shipping companies on how to navigate these very regulations. His first search was about passenger rights. He found the official government website that dealt with air travel complaints specifically about discrimination. He read through the rules. Yes, it was illegal for an airline to treat a passenger differently because of their race. He took note of that. A discrimination complaint would be a start. It would be a nuisance for the airline, a paperwork headache. But he had a feeling it would be a slow process, and the punishment, if any, would be a small fine. A slap on the wrist. It wasn't enough. The insult he had suffered demanded a more powerful response. He needed to find a rule that the airline could not ignore. A rule that was so critical to safety and operations that breaking it would cause immediate and severe consequences. Then he found it. He started reading about FAA regulations concerning flight crew duty times. This was the holy grail of airline operations. To prevent fatigue and ensure safety, pilots and flight attendants were only allowed to work for a strict, limited number of hours. They couldn't fly for 1 minute longer than their legal limit. It was a non-negotiable ironclad safety rule. A new idea, cold and brilliant, began to form in his mind. He calculated the timeline in his head. His flight had been scheduled to depart at a specific time, but because of the unnecessary and protracted delay at the gate, the argument over his seat, the plane had pushed back from the gate several minutes late. It was only a small delay, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. In the grand scheme of a cross-country flight, it seemed like nothing. But what if that delay pushed the crew closer to their legal limit? What if this crew was scheduled to work another flight after this one? That short delay at the gate could mean that by the time they landed, their remaining duty time would be less than the time needed for their next scheduled flight. He leaned back in his seat, the pieces clicking together in his mind. He wasn't just a passenger who had been wronged. He was a professional who understood the system better than the gate agent who had mocked him. He could use their own rulebook against them. He wasn't going to complain as an angry customer. He was going to report them as a concerned citizen and an industry expert who had witnessed a serious safety violation. He opened a new document on his computer and began to type. He wasn't filing the report yet. He was drafting it. He wrote with careful, precise language. He described the incident at the gate, noting the exact time the disagreement began and the time the plane finally pushed back. He stated that the delay was due to the gate agent's discriminatory reassignment of his seat and her subsequent argument with him. Then, he connected it to the safety rule. He wrote that this unnecessary delay, caused by the airline's own employee, had likely impacted the crew's legal duty times. He suggested that the FAA should immediately check whether this crew was now in violation of federal rest regulations and if they were being asked to operate their next flight illegally. He saved the document. He was ready. The plane soared through the night sky, a speck of light in the vast darkness. Inside, crammed in a middle seat, a well-dressed man sat perfectly still. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, unwavering confidence. He had the key. He had found the one pressure point that could bring a giant to its knees. He closed his laptop and looked out the window at the blackness. A small, hard smile touched his lips. The battle was over. He had just planned the winning move, and all he had to do was wait for the plane to land. The plane began its descent, the gentle pressure pushing him back into his cramped seat. All around him, people were stirring back to life, stretching, closing window shades, gathering their belongings. The man in the window seat next to him woke up with a start, while the woman in the aisle seat was already putting on her shoes. The bubble of quiet was popping, replaced by the rustling and chatter of a journey almost over. He, however, had not been sleeping. He had been sitting in a state of perfect patience, his mind clear and focused. The draft of his report was complete, saved on his laptop. The strategy was set. Now it was just a matter of execution. When the wheels of the plane finally touched down with a squeal and a burst of engine roar, a wave of relief went through the cabin. The familiar ding sounded and everyone unbuckled their seatbelts at once, standing up to crowd the aisle even though the plane was still taxiing. It was the usual impatient ritual of arrival. He did not stand. He remained seated, his posture straight despite the lack of space. He waited as the plane slowly made its way to the gate. He waited as the seatbelt sign finally went off with a final chime. He waited as the people in the rows ahead began to shuffle out. The woman next to him smiled weakly. "Tight squeeze, huh? Have a good one." "You too," he replied, his voice even and polite. He let the entire crowd of passengers push and shuffle their way out. He was in no hurry. He watched them go, a river of tired travelers flowing towards the exit. He saw a few of the first-class passengers looking refreshed and calm, already heading up the jet bridge. He felt no jealousy, only a cold sense of purpose. When the aisle was finally clear, he stood up. His body was stiff from the long confinement in the small seat. He reached down and retrieved his leather briefcase, feeling its solid, familiar weight in his hand. Then he stepped out into the aisle and walked off the plane, not as a defeated man, but as a general arriving on a new battlefield. The jet bridge was empty now, a long carpeted tunnel connecting the plane to the terminal. His footsteps were the only sound. He walked with a steady, determined pace. He emerged into the bright, noisy chaos of the terminal. People were everywhere, rushing to connecting flights, hugging loved ones, staring at departure boards. It was a scene of organized confusion. He needed a quiet place, a command post. He spotted what he was looking for. A small, isolated row of seats tucked away between a newsstand and a large pillar. It was far enough from the main flow of traffic to offer some privacy. He walked over and sat down, placing his briefcase on his lap. He took out his phone. This was the moment. The device in his hand felt suddenly powerful, a direct line to the levers of authority. He opened his web browser and went directly to the official website for the Federal Aviation Administration. He navigated past the main page, going straight to the section for reporting safety issues and violations. This was not the general complaint form for lost luggage or bad service. This was the serious one, the one that pilots and air traffic controllers themselves might use. He opened the draft on his laptop, transferring the key details to his phone with a few quick glances. He began to fill out the digital form. His fingers moved over the screen with calm precision. He was not typing in a rage. He was inputting data, like a scientist conducting an important experiment. First tap. In the section for nature of report, he selected 2 boxes. The first was suspected discrimination. In the description, he wrote clearly and without emotion. He stated the flight number, the date, the time. He explained that he, a passenger with a confirmed first-class ticket, was removed from his seat by a gate agent and reassigned to a middle seat in economy. He noted that a white male passenger was then given his original seat immediately afterward. He described the gate agent's dismissive attitude and her statement that he should be grateful to be on the flight at all. The words were factual, powerful in their simplicity. Second tap. He then selected the second, more critical box, crew duty time violation. This was the heart of his strategy. Here his tone became that of an expert. He explained that the argument at the gate, which he timed from start to finish, caused a delay of approximately 15 minutes to the pushback time of the aircraft. He stated that while this might seem minor, he had reason to believe this particular crew was on a tight turn, meaning they had another flight to operate shortly after this one. A 15-minute delay, he wrote, could be the difference between them having legal rest time and being forced to operate their next flight while fatigued and in direct violation of strict FAA safety regulations. He emphasized that this safety risk was created not by weather or air traffic, but by the unprofessional and discriminatory actions of the airline's own employee. Third tap. He reviewed the entire form one last time. Every fact was correct. Every detail was in place. The connection was clear. Discrimination at the gate had led directly to a potential safety violation in the air. He took a slow final breath. Then he pressed the submit button. A confirmation screen appeared on his phone. Thank you. Your report has been received by the FAA safety hotline. That was it. 3 taps. The deed was done. He put his phone back in his pocket. He closed his laptop and placed it carefully in his briefcase. The sound of the latch closing was soft but final. He stood up from the quiet row of seats and merged back into the river of people flowing through the terminal. He looked just like any other businessman, tired from a long flight heading to his next destination. No one looking at him would have any idea what he had just set in motion. He walked towards the exit, towards the baggage claim, towards the rest of his life. Behind him, in the digital world, the report was already traveling through official channels. It was a tiny spark, but it had been dropped into a room full of gunpowder. He didn't need to wait and watch the explosion. He knew with absolute certainty that it was coming. The man who had been told to be grateful for a middle seat had just filed a report that would shake an entire corporation. And he had done it all without ever raising his voice. The report, a simple digital file, landed in the FAA's system like a single, cold drop of water. But in the highly pressurized world of airline operations, that one drop was about to cause a crack. It started quietly, almost silently. In a dimly lit office at the FAA's operations center, an analyst was reviewing the overnight safety reports. His job was to look for patterns, for tiny glitches that could signal bigger problems. Most reports were minor, but one report, flagged as discrimination in crew duty, made him sit up straight. He read it once, then twice. The connection was clear and the potential violation was serious. Crew rest rules were not suggestions. They were the law, written in the blood of past tragedies. He immediately forwarded the report to his supervisor. Within minutes, a formal inquiry was launched. An official email, bearing the weight of the federal government, arrived in the inbox of the airline's chief operations officer, or COO. It was early morning. The COO was at his desk, sipping his first coffee, preparing for another long day. The subject line of the email, FAA formal inquiry, potential crew duty time violation, flight Tower, made his heart skip a beat. He opened it and read the details. The report described the gate incident and the resulting delay. His experienced eyes scanned the text, and he immediately understood the terrifying domino effect this could trigger. He grabbed his phone, his hand tight around it. He didn't call public relations. He didn't call legal. He called the airline's operations control center, the nerve center of the entire company. Pull the records for that crew from last night's flight Tround. Right now, he barked into the phone. In the operations center, a massive room humming with the glow of 100 computer screens and large wall-mounted maps, a manager typed furiously. He pulled up the crew's schedule. His face went pale. The businessman on the plane had been right. The crew was on a tight turn. They were scheduled to operate a flight from Chicago to Miami in just under 2 hours. And because of that 15-minute delay at the gate the night before, their legally required rest period had been cut in two. According to the strict math of FAA regulations, they were now officially out of compliance. They could not legally fly the next plane. This can't be right, the manager whispered. But the numbers didn't lie. He had no choice. He had to red flag the entire crew. He entered the command into the system. Instantly, every flight assigned to that pilot and that set of flight attendants was highlighted in red on screens across the operations center. A wave of quiet panic began to spread, but it got worse, much worse. The system was designed for safety and it was ruthlessly logical. The computer now checked. If this crew couldn't fly their plane to Miami, what happened to that plane? It would be stuck. And the plane that was supposed to fly from Miami to Atlanta was now also without a crew. And the plane from Atlanta to Dallas, and on and on. The computer began to automatically calculate the downstream effect. One by one, like a line of falling dominoes, flights began to be flagged. A soft, persistent alarm started beeping in the operations center. Red warning messages popped up on screens. Flight 452, Chicago to Miami, canceled, no legal crew. Flight 218, Miami to Atlanta, canceled, aircraft unavailable. Flight 891, Atlanta to Dallas, canceled, crew displacement. The numbers on the main screen started to climb. 10 flights, 25 flights, 50 flights. The COO, still on the phone with the operations center, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. How many? He asked, his voice hoarse. The manager on the other end sounded shell-shocked. Sir, it's over 100. It's still counting. The system is cascading. We have to ground them. It's the law. The COO sank into his chair. He could see it all unfolding. Planes full of passengers sitting at gates all across the country. would not be going anywhere. The news vans would soon arrive. The financial cost would be in the millions. The damage to the airline's reputation would be immeasurable. Ground them, he said, the words tasting like ash. Ground every flight that is out of compliance. Do it now. The order went out, and across the nation the chaos began. In an airport in Chicago, a family on their way to a beach vacation in Florida was told their flight was canceled. No reason was given. The mother tried to comfort her crying children. A businesswoman in Miami, on her way to a crucial meeting, stared in disbelief at the canceled sign next to her flight number. A young man trying to get home to see his family was told the next available flight wasn't for 2 days. Airport gate areas, once orderly, became seas of frustrated, angry people. Long, snaking lines formed at the customer service desks. The voices of airline agents, strained and apologetic, tried to explain the unexplainable. "We sincerely apologize for the operational disruption." The phrase was repeated over and over, a meaningless corporate mantra in the face of real human disappointment. Back in the operations center, the final number flashed on the screen. It was a number that would be burned into the memory of every executive at the airline for years to come. Flights. Grounded. 173 jets, filled with thousands of passengers, were going nowhere, all because of a 15-minute delay, all because a gate agent had decided to take a first-class seat from a well-dressed man and tell him to be grateful. The man who had caused it all was now in a taxi heading to his hotel. He looked out the window at the city waking up. His phone was silent. He had no way of knowing about the storm he had just unleashed. But he didn't need to know the details. He knew the principle. He had pressed the button and he trusted the system to do the rest. The giant had been tripped up by its own rules. And the cost of that single discriminatory act was just beginning to be tallied. The storm broke fast. News channels, always hungry for a dramatic story, picked up on the massive travel disruption within hours. The headline was simple and shocking. Airline grounds 173 flights due to crew scheduling issue. On television screens, reporters stood in front of crowded airports, talking about thousands of stranded, angry passengers. The internet was buzzing with speculation and fury. What kind of scheduling issue could possibly be this bad? Inside the airline's corporate headquarters, it was a scene of pure crisis. The CEO, a man who was used to being in control, felt the walls closing in. His phone was ringing nonstop, reporters, board members, major corporate clients. The financial cost was a nightmare, but the damage to the company's reputation was a deeper, more lasting wound. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He stormed into the office of the chief operations officer, the man responsible for the airline's day-to-day functioning. "What in the world happened?" the CEO demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "A scheduling issue doesn't ground half our fleet." The COO, who had aged 10 years in a single morning, looked up from his computer. His face was grim. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a printout of the FAA report. "Started with this," the COO said quietly. The CEO snatched the paper. His eyes scanned the formal language. He read about the first-class ticket, the reassignment to a middle seat, the discriminatory remarks from the gate agent. His jaw tightened. Then he read the second part, about the crew duty time violation caused by the delay. He was a businessman, but he understood enough about regulations to see the perfect, devastating logic of it. He finished reading and let the paper fall back onto the desk. There was a long, heavy silence. "One passenger," the CEO finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "One passenger did this?" The COO just nodded. The CEO understood immediately. This wasn't an accident. This was a consequence. The man at the gate wasn't just a disgruntled customer. He was a strategist who had found the one weak spot in their entire multi-billion-dollar operation and had applied precise, unbelievable pressure. He had used their own rulebook to destroy their day. "Find him," the CEO said. "Get me a number. I need to talk to him now." A day later, the businessman was in his hotel room, preparing for the meetings he had originally flown in for. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered it with his usual calm tone. "Hello?" "Sir," said a voice deep and heavy with responsibility. It was the CEO. "My name is... Well, I'm the CEO of the airline. I believe you had a difficult experience with one of our employees recently." The businessman didn't speak. He simply waited, letting the silence on the line do the talking. The CEO cleared his throat. What happened to you was unacceptable. It was wrong. On behalf of the entire company, I want to offer you my deepest, most sincere apology. The apology was full and formal. It was everything a public relations team would write. But the businessman knew it was just words. The real apology had happened yesterday when 173 planes stayed on the ground. The CEO continued. We are prepared to offer you a full refund for your ticket, lifetime elite status, and a very significant financial settlement for the distress we caused. He named a number. It was a large number, enough to make most people's eyes go wide. The businessman listened, his expression unchanged. The money was not the point. It had never been about the money. That is a generous offer, he said, his voice even and measured. But it only solves my problem. It does nothing for the next person. It does nothing to change the culture that allowed that gate agent to think she could treat me that way in the first place. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The CEO had expected anger or greed. He had not expected this cool, logical demand for systemic change. What is it that you want? The CEO asked. I want to know what you are going to do to make sure this never ever happens to anyone else, the businessman said. I want to see your plan for mandatory company-wide anti-discrimination training. Not a boring video people sleep through. Real training. And I want to review the materials myself before they are rolled out. He wasn't asking for a check. He was asking for a seat at the table. He was asking for the power to change the machine from the inside. The CEO was silent for a moment. He realized he wasn't negotiating with a victim. He was negotiating with a partner he never knew he needed. Done, the CEO said without hesitation. We will draft the new training program immediately. You will have full approval rights. And the gate agent involved has been suspended, pending a full investigation. Thank you, the businessman said. I look forward to reviewing your proposal. He hung up the phone. He felt a quiet sense of closure, but not of victory. Victory would come later, when he saw the new training materials. When he knew that every employee, from the CEO to the newest baggage handler, would understand that discrimination has a cost so high it can ground an entire fleet. A few weeks later, a formal envelope arrived at his office. Inside was a copy of the airline's new Respect and Dignity training module. He sat at his desk and read through every page. It was thorough. It was direct. It used clear language and real-world scenarios. It specifically addressed the kind of subtle bias and power tripping that he had experienced. It was good. He picked up a pen and wrote a short note on the cover page. Approved. He didn't sign it with a flourish. It was just a single word. But that word carried the weight of 173 grounded jets. It carried the echo of a gate agent's dismissive voice. And it carried the quiet satisfaction of a man who had not just fought for a seat on a plane, but for a principle that would now echo through the halls of a giant corporation. The man who was told to be grateful for a middle seat had, in the end, been given something far more valuable. He had been given the power to ensure that dignity, not discrimination, would now have a first-class seat in the company's future. And that was a victory worth more than any ticket.